This episode of Trifles is brought to you by listeners like you, who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the lodger was veiled, the face was yellow, and the valley was fearsome, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder what kind of medical practice Dr. Watson actually ran? Or about the number of Holmes's monographs? Or how much the rent was at 221B Baker Street?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 378. B is for Biscuit. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm minute Burt Wolder.
No, you're life size. That's what I like about you.
Oh, yeah, I suppose. You call this living? I guess so.
Oh, boy. Well, we are pleased to be with you here on the last day or the last episode of the month of March. That means we have a drawing coming up toward the end of the episode, so you'll want to stay tuned for that. As a reminder, all of our Patreon and Substack supporters at any level are automatically entered into a drawing every month for a free back issue of the Baker Street Journal. So check into that either at trifles.substack.com or patreon.com/trifles. The links are right there in the show notes or, of course, on the SherlockHolmesPodcast.com website. Take a look around, see what suits your fancy, and sign up wherever you feel the need. Okay, well, I've been preparing myself for this. I hope you've been girding yourself for it too, Bert. B is for biscuit, that's good enough for me. B is for biscuit, that's good enough for me. B is for biscuit, that's good enough for me. Oh, biscuit, 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 start with B.
You know, that is the best impression of Ed Asner I have ever heard.
Well, Ed loved his biscuits.
That's
Don't
great.
you know?
That's great.
Oh, works out.
Did Cookie Monster ever really sing B is for Biscuit?
No.
He should have.
Well, I don't know if there was a British edition of Sesame Street. He may have, but that, of course, is a takeoff on the old Cookie Monster song, C is for Cookie, which was featured on Sesame Street I think it started in the, that song started in the 70s and was updated along the way. So, but that was Cookie Monster's way of professing his love of his favorite food.
Yes, you know, as Cookie aged, he introduced new lyrics, and I'm particularly fond of the one that talked about Steak Diane.
Well, you know, your taste buds evolve over time.
As his taste became more sophisticated.
Yeah, well, good for him. And in his later years, after Sesame Street cut him off and he was living from hand to mouth, which is pretty much how he lived while he was on the show anyway.
Was living, right?
He did the now infamous V is for vodka. Oh, yeah. Aww. Poor Cookie. Vodka Monster doesn't have the same child-friendly ring to it as Cookie Monster. Well, we're not here to talk about Cookie Monster or Sesame Street. We're here to talk about biscuits, very specifically in the canon. Now, look, we've covered all kinds of food here over the course of the years, and we do have a playlist from SoundCloud that we've embedded on the website, and we'll have links to all of those shows in the show notes. But just as a quick review, the 10 tracks that I have listed so far include something a little nutritious at Simpsons, which was one of our early episodes, A Noble Supper. We looked at what Holmes served when, Lord Robertson Simon and Hattie Durand came at the conclusion of The Noble Bachelor. We look overall at Sherlock Holmes' dining habits, and then we took a broad look at British food. Another episode, the Victorian scene for vegetarians. And we looked at buffets, particularly at railway stations, and then breakfast at Baker Street, and then very specifically at the mentions of eggs in the canon, and then of dairy products, and then finally, most recently, at Dining with Sherlock Holmes, the Sherlock Holmes cookbook by Julia Carlson Rosenblatt and Frederick Sonnenschmidt. So that brings us to effectively what is a dessert-themed episode here with biscuits. So how do you want to approach this? Because there's a number of different references to biscuits, but biscuits as we know them in the United States are different than how the Brits define biscuits.
Yes, they're typically digestives, and that's the history. And we can certainly talk about the history of biscuits. Years ago when I lived in Britain, I would, for a while, I talked to colleagues of mine and told them about Girl Scout cookies, I remember. And we had some boxes of Girl Scout cookies. And I still remember the deep disappointment my British friends had in what they described as the odd cardboard-like characteristic of what I thought were great treats, but it's all what you're used to.
But I thought you were going to say they expressed disappointment that those cookies didn't taste at all like Girl Scouts,
like real Girl Scouts. Yes, Wednesday. Yes, but big names, in England for the longest time included companies like Peak-Freen and Huntley and Palmer, and then Garibaldi's. Were big in beginning in the middle of the 19th century. Garibaldi's a flat cookie with raisins. Over here, we would call them raisin biscuits, I think. And then, you still have digestives, hobnobs, and eventually the whole history here is colored by the availability of different things. So, for example, when you had sea voyages in the 17th century, and in the 18th century, you wanted your sailors to be equipped with, a very plain biscuit. And typically these were twice baked and used as digestives, and they lasted a terribly long time. So they were great to put on sea. And it was also a time, before that, when sugar was fairly expensive to use. So as sugar got less expensive and became more plentiful, that was added into biscuit recipes and so on. But in general, as you pointed out, the British definition of a biscuit is not a synonym for what an American would call a cookie.
Yeah, it's an approximation. And really, according to Wikipedia, in the Commonwealth, biscuits may be hard and may be savory or sweet, such as chocolate biscuits, digestives, hobnobs, ginger nuts, rich tea, bourbons, and custard creams.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Those all sound excellent.
And one of the nice things is, particularly today, the availability of these things over here. When I was first over there, it was very unusual. You needed a specialty market to find any of that stuff in the States, but now it's much more available, which is great. Yeah. I love digestive biscuits, hobnobs, things like that. The
international sections of supermarkets now, you can find those regularly. But that was back in the early 90s or so. I was just coming out of college, and I would do day trips around New England and find these little standalone British food shops, little tea shops, and that's where you could go and stock up on your Heinz beans and your digestives and shortbreads and all the rest. Yeah. So, well, there are really three mentions of biscuits in the canon. that we wanted to cover here. And they're three, I think, very well. One is different from the other two. As they would say on Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other. So why don't we start with probably what is one of the most famous appearances of Biscuits in the canon, and that is when Thornycroft Huxtable fainted on the hearthrug, on that bearskin rug at 221B in the Priory School. And Dr. Watson, of course, was there to apply some brandy. And Thornycroft Huxtable came to, and he apologized profusely and said, if I might have a glass of milk and a biscuit, I have no doubt that I should be better. So
Now,
go ahead.
I don't have that text in front of me, but do we know where the glass of milk and the biscuit came from? And the reason I'm asking is,
That's a good question.
It's not possible that in the rooms there was a biscuit barrel, was there?
No, they would have called down from Mrs. Hudson. Let's see.
They certainly didn't have any milk handy.
No, when you are quite restored. I'm quite well again. I can't imagine how I came to be so weak. And they go on, they have their conversation. Holmes turns to the encyclopedia and looks up the Duke of Holderness. It's a princely offer, blah, blah, blah. And then he says why he comes 3 days later after an event. The state of your chin gives the date as to ask for my humble services. And then Watson says, our visitor had consumed his milk and biscuits. The light had come back to his eyes. So no indication that they rang for Mrs. Hudson and she brought it up, but
an indication that it wasn't just one biscuit.
That is true.
It was at least two.
It was more than one, yes. He was hungry.
It's just a trifle. Goodbye.
Oh. So they described him when he first came in so large, so pompous, and so dignified that he was the very embodiment of self-possession and solidity. When he slipped down on the floor, and there was that majestic figure prostrate and insensible upon our bearskin hearthrug. So, I would imagine that being the headmaster of a school of boys, I'm sure boys enjoyed their cookies and milk, their biscuits and milk. So, Dr. Huxtable, with his heavy white face and his rolling chins, he must have partaken in milk and cookie time at the Priory School with the boys.
Well, yeah, but that's not what's going on at a Victorian boarding school. The typical boarding school breakfast was things like toast and jam and bacon and eggs and porridge and tea to drink. And, if there were biscuits, and there probably were, they were really more the digestive sort of biscuit.
Yeah, but I can imagine Dr. Huxtable late at night breaking into the larder and stuffing his face full of digestives like Cookie Monster. Because look, what's the first thing he does when he gets up to the sitting room? He makes a beeline for the bearskin hearthrug, another fuzzy entity. He was the Cookie Monster at Baker Street. Nom, 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 nom.
Well, it sounds like a paper. Sounds like you should be writing this down. This is good.
Oh. So where else do we have someone who has a hankering for some biscuits?
Well, it's funny. I don't know that I would describe it as a hankering. Oh, well, we could describe. You can do the hankering. But in the Gloria Scott, we have the crew that chose to abandon ship. And I really like this for a reason that I'll tell you. It's not because of what's going on in the case. But when they abandon ship, of course, in this sad situation, one of Holmes's earliest cases, the crew that chooses to leave was given a suit of sailor's togs each, a barrel of water, 2 casks, one of junk, I can't imagine what was in that, and one of biscuits, and a compass. And the reason why I like this is that the original biscuits that they had in the 18th century and in the 17th century for sea voyages given to the sailors and so on were basically these, also for breakfast in Britain, you could have some fried bread and things like this. But they were, I think at least twice baked, so they're very, very dense, these things. And in some cases, sailors would use them for postcards. They were so indestructible. And there is one.
You're telling me these aren't custard creams?
There is one from the 18th century, 1784, in which a sailor has laboriously scratched into it. This biscuit was given, and then he puts his name at Berwick on Tuesday, 13 April, 1784.
And it's still in existence?
It is. It's at the National Maritime Museum.
Oh my goodness!
In English heritage.
It's like a Georgian Twinkie. That's incredible. Well, I mean, that's what we would refer in the States would refer to that as hardtack.
I guess so, yeah.
Or at some speckled band dinner meetings, that would be the layer of pastry on top of the steak and kidney pie. Some years we have a very flaky, airy crust, and another ones they would be unleavened hardtack, basically.
Well, that's matzah, yeah.
Yeah, effectively. So yeah. Interesting. So that's more of a cracker than an actual biscuit.
Uncrackable cracker.
Yeah. So this biscuit is kind of unlike the others. It's not the sweet kind. It's really the kind meant for long voyages and for a long shelf life, quite frankly.
Yes.
And interestingly, according to the Royal Navy Museum, it just as a background, the whole point of these kinds of biscuits, again, long-lasting, inexpensive, used for sustenance during long sea voyages or land migrations or military campaigns. There were instances of Egyptian sailors and Roman soldiers who carried a form of a hard grain-based loaf with them. And in 1588, the daily allowance on board a Royal Naval ship was 1 pound of biscuits plus 1 gallon of beer. So, Royal Navy hardtack during Queen Victoria's reign was made by machine at the Royal Clarence Victualling Yard at Gosport, Hampshire, stamped with the Queen's mark and the number of the oven in which it was baked. And biscuits remained an important part of the Royal Navy sailors' diet until the introduction of canned goods. Canned meat was first marketed in 1814, and preserved beef in tins officially introduced to the Royal Navy in 1847. So there you go.
Well, that is, if you think about that and do the math, so let's say, you have 50 sailors on board a ship, and each one on a daily basis is allocated a pound of biscuits. So that's 50 pounds by weight of biscuits a day, plus 50 gallons of beer. Seems like it would have been a lot of sloshing and scratching.
Yo ho ho.
As the boat, went up and down on the waves.
Well, and that's interesting because by the end of the voyage, that material would have been, initially I'm sure it formed part of the ballast. So it had to be replaced over the course of the voyage with other material.
Yeah, with all the treasures from the far reaches of the empire that you were busy loading to take back home.
Yeah, there you go. That or the latrine. Okay, before we get to the last item in these trifling mentions of biscuits, we are going to pause here for just a moment for our monthly drawing. Just as a reminder, all of our paid supporters on Patreon and Substack are automatically entered into this drawing. It's completely at random, so we are going to bring out the big prize wheel and give it a spin. And as a reminder, this winner will get a back issue of the Baker Street Journal. And it's landing on number 72. Number 72, and it looks like that is Ty Robinson. Ty, congratulations. We will have a copy of the back issue of the Baker Street Journal in the mail to you. Thanks again, and remember, if you would like to join Ty as a potential winner, just check out the show notes or go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/trifles or Substack, trifles.substack.com.
Well, now we mentioned this earlier, so what is of these three references? We've talked a little bit about the Gloria Scott, and we've talked, of course, about Thornycroft Huxtable. So what's the third one?
Well, the third one is probably more in the line of what Thornycroft Huxtable was asking for. It is in The Dying Detective. Remember, Holmes was he was not in disguise, but he was manifesting a kind of illness to lure Culverton Smith there, and Watson, of course, very helpfully brought him there, and then hid behind Holmes's headboard to hear the confession. Holmes, during the time, underwent 3 days of absolute fast, and he applied belladonna and beeswax and rouge to kind of make it look like he was wasting away. So when he came to, or when he had captured Culverton Smith, captured his confession, his immediate request was some claret and biscuits. So this could be seen to be almost like a diabetic looking for a quick sugar fix, right? A boost of energy.
Well, it would have been, I suppose, easy to digest.
Yeah. But interestingly, unlike Thornycroft Huxtable, who asked for milk, Holmes asked for claret. Now, what do we make of that?
What do we make of that? Well, that's a good question. He had probably just had a recent case delivered from his importers and wanted to know what the terroir was like in the latest growth. Although he wouldn't be opening a first growth bottle. So it is a good question. He maybe just wanted a little wine.
Well, that's certainly the case. Well, sweet biscuits are typically served with sherry. It's a complement to fortified wine. But of course, a claret is a Bordeaux.
Right.
And it can be sweet white wine, but a claret is typically a red. So why would Holmes ask for red wine with his biscuits? So I have a theory.
Oh, good.
And that is, look, he's coming off of this 3-day fast. I don't know if you've ever fasted for long periods of time, but the mind can do strange things when starved of food. And it could be Holmes experiencing some sort of delirium, and he misspoke. Or maybe Watson, being behind the headboard, misheard him, asking for a claret rather than a sherry. But it could just be that he wasn't the same kind of connoisseur of sweet treats like our rolling-chinned Professor Dr. Huxtable. So the real cookie monster of Baker Street is the visitor, not the resident.
And that is just, and not even one with ladyfingers, a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
If I might have a biscuit and a glass of milk, I have no doubt I should soon be better.
Mrs. Hudson is preparing something at this moment.